Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Joining me today is Pedro Antunes, who is the Chief Economist for the Conference Board of Canada. Thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Mario. Thanks for having me.
Well, you folks this week put out your economic forecast for this year and next year for the provinces and for Canada. I wanted to ask you a few questions, first of all, about Alberta. The forecast is for 7.2% growth in 2021, 5.6% growth in 2022, leading the country in that regard. Tell me some of the reasoning behind that kind of optimistic outlook for the Alberta economy in the next 2 years.
Yeah. Well, I think, yes, it is strong growth, but again, we're coming off a very atypical year. We're coming off of a very steep decline. And in fact, Alberta had the steepest decline, we feel, in terms of its performance in 2020, hit doubly hard by the global pandemic, with the effect that had on oil prices and the domestic economy. So really, Alberta suffered a double whammy in 2020, which a lot of provinces only faced a single whammy. And so coming off of that, we do expect the recovery to be stronger. And I think for Alberta, like other provinces, everything is in place in terms of the domestic economy. We're really expecting that COVID-19 will be behind us in the second half of this year. So that should allow the domestic economy to reopen. And we've seen it in the past when we do reopen, we've seen consumers getting back out there. Certainly, everything is in place in the sense that, federal and provincial governments have supported incomes through that crisis. And then for Alberta, on top of that, we have seen the kind of resource prices and oil prices recover. Oil prices are hovering around $70 a barrel these days, and that's really good news for the province in terms of profitability. And what we're expecting to drive that growth next year and in 2022 is a return of investment, which has been, decimated through this crisis.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know, Pedro, but it looks like the province is reopening up again on June 10th, tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. So more things opening in that regard, more people allowed in retail centers, etc., and indoor dining and all that stuff. And we're talking. They're talking. Well, not we're, but they're talking about early July, all restrictions being lifted in this province, and perhaps even as early as late June. That's got to have a tremendous impact on the economy, does it not?
Yeah, well, and you know what? This has been such a bizarre recession because obviously it was policy induced. We wanted to put in policies in place to stop the economy, or at least stop certain segments of the economy we felt were at risk of spreading the disease. And this continues to this day. Essentially, we know exactly how deep the impact has been on all of those sectors that require in-person transactions. So, of course, that includes anything to do with tourism, accommodation, and food and beverage services, I should say, but also arts, recreation, movie theaters, all of these things and a lot of services as well. So we know where those industries stand, and a lot of them, some of them, for example, air transportation is currently running at 6% of what was normal pre-COVID. Other segments like clothing, retailers, like accommodation and food, they're operating in the 50-60% of what is normal. So as we reopen those segments of the economy, that domestic part of what I was talking about, we do expect those to recover fairly quickly, with the exception of anything to do with international tourism. So that's going to be very good news. And as I mentioned earlier, when we looked at this recession, it's very, very strange in comparison to any other prior recession, in the sense that, again, it was policy measures forcing the economy to shut down, but at the same time, a huge amount of support, and especially in terms of households with the CERB and some of these other programs. So household income is actually really quite strong. I'm sure your listeners have heard about how household savings rates increased last year. So we have the wherewithal to, we're frustrated. We've been at home a long time. We're anxious to spend, lots of pent up demand, and we're really hopeful we'll see that unleashed in the second half of this year.
What's your take also on the labor market in Alberta? Where do you see that headed for the rest of this year?
Yeah, now that's capital investment. We talked a little bit about it earlier on, related to profitability in the oil sector. That's been decimated. The construction sector was decimated, which includes drilling and bigger capital projects and renovations around the oil patch. And that's a fairly labor-intensive industry, and it has a broad supply chain within the province. So that's had a lot of impact on labor markets in the province. And up until the last few months, Alberta was one of the worst hit in terms of employment, in terms of its unemployment rate among the provinces. I think there's a little bit of a hope going forward. Again, much more related here to the construction sector. Big business investment or big oil patch investment is picking up. Yeah. And residential construction also has lagged in the province relative to others, but it's now picking up in the province as well. So I think it's not going to be a phenomenal growth year for employment in the province, but I think things are going to get better and better as we look to the end of this year and into 2022.
Okay, one last question for you, Pedro, regarding Canada. Your forecast is for 6.1% growth in 2021 and 3.5% growth the following year. Just your general thoughts on the Canadian economy, and again, that's pretty decent growth that you're looking for.
Yeah, and again, it is a recovery from a deep recession. We had a 5.4% decline in the economic activity in 2020. That's a huge recession. So a lot of that is just picking up back to kind of more normal pace as the economy reopens, and of course, it does drive this strong growth number. Yeah, I think when we look across the country, there's a number of things happening. First of all, resource prices. So the global economy is picking up. We're seeing reopening across the world, and that is helping resource prices. And Canada, the resource sector is still very important. When we see resource prices doing well, that helps. Essentially, our purchasing power helps us invest. It builds income in this country, and that's been very positive. Yeah. The other piece, of course, is the reopening of the domestic economy. In the same way that we're expecting that for Alberta, we're seeing that across the country. The vaccine rollout is going well. I think we're seeing lots of available vaccines, and we're seeing provinces with the ability to roll that out fairly effectively. Now, there's risks to the forecast. I would still say, the things that I'm no expert on infectious diseases, but there's lots of concern, I think, still among these variants. But if we are able to contain the health risks, I think everything is there. Everything is in place really to see the economy pick up.
All right, super. Well, thanks very much for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, that was Pedro Antunes, who is Chief Economist of the Conference Board of Canada. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Thanks for joining us today.